that, and then make sure I've only got. Why? I don't know why Lewis Brenton is still. His audio is still showing up, but for reasons I don't understand. Okay. So it should be okay sound-wise. I don't know if there's anybody there, but... Oh.
Says there's 5
Evil
viewers.
John and Fred is there. You can only hear me. Is that still true?
Oh, there's only
Oh,
one
there's
of
only
you,
one of
I
me,
think.
so I'm not echoing. Oh, okay.
Okay. so no
Yeah,
echo.
got
okay.
it. Okay. Well, good.
So, or rather, no echo.
So I successfully set up the audio without having to wait for everything to fall apart in disaster first. Good. Beautiful. So before we start,
Thank you, Fred.
we should figure out two things. One, our timing is such that we are set to record another book club in December, which is always tricky.
December or November, so.
Well, right. So, because we usually go every other month. So,
Yeah. Well, which I believe is when I got confused because I thought I read the book last month, we were speaking about it last month, so it means it's been a month.
Well, so, I'm glad we didn't do it a month ago because I literally just finished it about 2 hours ago. So,
it's there. Me, it's been a month since I've read it.
Okay.
So I reread some summaries, so
there you go.
My won't be as good as.
So I was thinking that we either do it in December or we just put it off and wait until January. I don't know if anybody has any particularly strong feelings one way or the other.
I'm fine either way. I mean, me in November is not a big thing because we had Thanksgiving 2 weeks ago.
But December is still a crunch month.
There's stuff.
So if we did it in December, we would do it like mid-month and not wait till the end of the month. Tracy, do you have a preference?
I'm fine with that.
We could try for mid-December.
You say that with all sorts of confidence.
You sound like you're not too sure. Do you want to be on the safe side and we do it in January then?
I'm just thinking that we might want a distraction, though, given what could be happening.
Okay.
Soon.
Yeah.
So let's aim for December.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we get to make the fun and exciting choice of figuring out what the book is going to be.
Yeah.
And I think I've picked the last several just because I write the scripts and I like to put it in there. But I figured I'd ask around here.
Well, we have a few series that we are following. We could continue those series or try something new. That's a general view that I'm
we have a book that maybe is like small and doesn't involve world-shattering events or an apocalypse or...
Okay. That is fair. A book that is small and it doesn't involve world-shattering events.
Well, it could have some world-shattering events. I'm just saying, maybe not the evil overthrow of a government or...
What?
I mean, something not grounded in reality.
Nothing that hits too close to home.
Which is ironic because that's kind of what the book that we just read was about.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm offering this suggestion.
Let's see, what do we have on our list?
If you want something nice and light, I recently read I don't know what you'd call it, young adult, adolescent book by Cressidia Cowell, who wrote the How to Train Your Dragon series, called The Wizards of Once, that I read with my youngest kid, and that was a lot of fun and light and not necessarily about the end of the world. If I'm remembering that it's the book I think it is.
Yeah. On our list, we have The Crystal Cave, which is a Arthurian Merlin book. that seems to be probably light in nature.
Okay.
Basically, the story of Merlin, I believe, as he grows
Right,
up.
it's the story sort of how Merlin became Merlin.
Merlin. So that's on the list.
There's some books on the list because I already own the audiobook and I figured, hey, this could work as a book club book, and I think that's one of them. So,
Oh, I have Brenda has a physical book of that, so I know I can pick it up and just
nice.
release out. I'm just looking at your stuff from what I know.
So yeah, The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart.
Is that something? There's also
which is not a small book, Tracy. It's a almost 17-hour audiobook.
Okay, less so.
So
there's also the Color Magic or the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett.
Okay.
I mean, those are. I'm looking at the list that we have.
Yeah.
So.
Fred is suggesting Rick Riordan. I haven't read the newer series. The what is it? The Norse mythology one. Rick Riordan. What's it called?
Asgard?
Asgard?
It is the Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard series.
Sword of Summer?
That's the first book, yes. So it's still 15, almost 15 and a half hours. But I also know from having listened to Rick Riordan books before, they all sort of follow a similar formula, and they're not real heavy. There's not real heavy lifting in terms of, like, they're fun, enjoyable. I almost think of them as kind of popcorn reading. I don't have to think too much, and then I kind of see where it's going, and it's kind of fun and light, you know?
We apparently already have
That's what Fred says in the chat, yes.
Yeah.
So you want to do that one?
Sure.
All right. Rick Riordan,
If that's okay.
Magnus Chase, The Sword of Summer. I might have to listen to it twice then, because my kids will want to listen to it as well. So I've added it to my wish list, and then I can pick it up later.
I'm checking if my library has it. Probably do.
I saved one Audible credit for the year because I knew I might need it before the end of the year ran up. As last year, I started buying all of my credits one lump sum at the beginning of the year. It was a little bit cheaper. So I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to use them all anyway. I might as well just buy them all now. But then you get 12 credits, and it's like, okay, but now I got to make it last. I can't just go out and buy a bunch of books in January, you know? So,
Yeah. Cool.
All right, so that's the...
So, The Sword of Summer by Rick Riordan.
Which I should put in the script. I'll be reading the...
Oh.
Do we all know who Rick Riordan is generally? He's
the
the guy who wrote, like, Percy Jackson.
Okay. I haven't even read Percy Jackson. So.
But you're familiar with it. They made a movie out of it. Okay. Okay.
So.
Having read The Kane Chronicles, Percy Jackson, and then there was a series that followed Percy Jackson with the same characters. I've read all those with the boys. And they all follow, like, almost the exact same formula. Like, you can guess in chapter 3 exactly how the whole story is going to play out, and yet I still kind of have fun listening to it and reading it and going along. So I anticipate that this will follow a very similar formula, but that I will enjoy it nonetheless. So, good suggestion, Fred. Thanks. That's fair. He says it's character-driven, not plot-driven. Okay. Are we ready to get going in our talk about The Killing Moon?
So
let's kill it.
Tracy, did you want to hop on the script?
Oh, I thought this was one where I didn't. Sorry.
Typically, you've talked in this one. I know it's been what, 4 months, 6 months since you've done a book club.
I think so. Yeah.
I think you missed the last couple.
It was hard.
Yeah. Moving and all that.
It's hard for. Yeah, with moving and then living in a shed.
Right.
It was hard to find time to read.
I hear that.
Find it.
Oh. And we're all going to stay awake. Tracy is wearing My Little Pony D&D. Is that what that shirt is?
Yep.
Nice.
I'm wearing a Mass Effect
okay.
shirt.
I've got D&D going. My D&D Beyond. I have a total of 3 D&D shirts, if you don't count the one Tome Show shirt that I have. That's kind of an in-joke with Thad from way back in the day that doesn't really make sense to people. So if you don't count that, I have 3 D&D shirts. So that's why I end up cycling through. Those are the ones I wear on streams. Evil John's got a Star Wars shirt on today. All right. I see Tracy's logged in.
Yeah, it has. Okay, now it's gotten. It wasn't wide enough originally, so I could only see half the script. Okay. But it was divided in half.
All right.
Short ways.
Let me get that ready, and then I suppose I should record. Do that. Okay. Maybe. Okay. I think. My recording software is being weird, so let me make sure it's working.
And then did you want to update the first part of the script?
Probably. What's out of date?
Above, with us as always, is Eric Paquette.
Oh, yeah. I can't.
Not above?
I can't edit from where you've highlighted. Oh. Weird. You had highlighted it, so I just started typing as if that was going to do anything.
Okay.
So I don't know where I typed a random "the" somewhere on the script, but it's out there. Sword of Summer by Rick Riordan. Is Fred going to join us? He seemed into this book.
You going to join us, Fred?
I'm sure he'll respond.
Non-committal.
That's quite the. Oh, there we go. Sure. Okay, so we are streaming. We've been streaming and chit-chatting with Evil John and Fred for a bit, but we've been recording for a good minute and a half. So everybody say hi to Sam.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, Sam.
And then we'll get started. Tracy, you take the lead.
Awesome. This episode of The Tome Show is brought to you by listeners like you. Thanks for using the Tome's Amazon and DM's Guild affiliate links and our wonderful patrons over at patreon.com/The Tome Show. Welcome to the Tome Book Club of October 2020. The Tome is a D&D news, reviews, and interview show, and I'm your Tome host, Tracy Hurley.
And I'm Jeff Greiner. In each book club episode, we discuss one D&D related book, spoilers be damned, in full book club style. And our book this time around is The Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin, a book that was in the appendix of, was it the 5th edition DMG? Is that where they put the appendix? It's no longer the appendix in like it was way back in the 1st edition, but it's one of the books that they say you can look at for inspiration, so that's why we're looking at that. Next episode, we're going to talk about The Sword of Summer by Rick Riordan, because Fred, Tracy's husband, is in the chat watching the stream, and he suggested it, and so there we are. That's how we make decisions sometimes.
Thank you, Fred.
And you may have heard that voice. With us, as always, is Eric Paquette.
Hello. Bonjour.
Bonjour, comment allez-vous?
Ça va très bien, toi?
Ça va. Fatigué.
because that's everything continuing.
Oh, you're gonna run out of my French real fast. It's been I figured out recently that it's been a little more than 20 years since I took French. So that's about.
And I wanted to answer in Spanish.
Oh, there you go.
So.
I might be able to understand a bit of Spanish because it is one of the romantic languages, kind of like Italian, but yeah.
All right, so yeah, we said if the next book is going to be The Sword of Summer by Rick Riordan. If you want to keep up with us, the plan is to record mid-December. Before people get too crazy busy with the holidays and what have you. We're going to be doing a lot of weird shenanigans with our scheduling, I think, in the next couple of months. Squeezing in our fitness episodes and all of our reviews and the election night special that we're doing on November 3rd and everything else. I think it's going to be... We're just going to kind of play it by ear and record a few things for the next few months and figure it out until January. Does that sound fair?
Sounds fair.
All right. So now let's talk about our current book, The Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin. Somebody explain this book to me. Like, not just as a way of introducing or starting our conversation, but honestly and a little bit sincerely. I struggled with this book, so somebody explain it to me.
It takes a while to get really into it because you're started and it feels like you're supposed to know this story, but it is the first book of the series. But so she is writing by showing rather than narrating as we're traditionally when we start.
Yeah, well, and I thought she was going to help us a little bit because it, at the beginning it feels like the two main characters are this one character who's an apprentice to, or becomes an apprentice to the gatherers, right? And I'm not going to remember the names at all because that was one of the areas where I was confused because she, as an author, she tended to throw a lot of names and you weren't sure, is this a group of people? Is this a country? Is this a city? Is this a specific person? Or is this specific person's other name? Because every main character it has a second name as well, and sometimes they just get thrown back and forth depending on who's saying it, and without reminding us that that's who they are. And sometimes it's a religion or a religious practice. All have different names as well, and she just kind of throws them at you and expects that you'll catch on. And I didn't always catch on. It's probably a failing for me. I don't know. But as a first book, it didn't feel like the first book of a series because she expects me to have already built this setting in my head, and I hadn't.
I think part of it too is that the first part of the book focuses on a particular culture, which I forget. It begins with
Gajara?
Gajara, which is kind of a city-state, is at least in my mental model. One of the things we can point out right away, some of the criticism about the book has been that there wasn't a map released along with it, so this is all your own mental model, and everyone's model may not line up in part because of that. And you're steeped in this religious beliefs that they have, in particular in terms of dreams and the afterlife, and how dreams can themselves be actually powerful, and the power can be harvested to do things. In the beginning, we mainly just hear about the gatherers, or, as you were saying earlier, there are these types of priests that do gathering that can get, I think they call it dream blood at some point.
Yeah, dream blood.
Yeah, this type of stuff, and it can heal people, and that's why they do it. And then the sharers, I think it was, are the ones that can use that to heal people.
Yeah, they're the clerics. So that's like,
right. And then suddenly in, I think it was Eru or something. The
character who at the beginning I did not think was going to be a point of view perspective character, and then ended up being like the main point of view perspective character. So.
Right. So he's a gatherer priest. And so there is this idea in the city-state that There can be, I'm going to call them commissions, but I don't think that was the word necessarily that they used. But you basically can decide to go into people's dreams. I call it assassination. They would say those are different. That's a different group that does
they're
that.
gathered. They're not killed. They're gathered.
Right.
They call it the tithe, right?
Yeah, they pay a tithe, and it's in service to the goddess. But people can ask for tithes to be gathered, which becomes an interesting part of this because as he tries to gather this particular person, he is basically told he's being used. And he ends up totally fumbling the rest of the gathering. And in this case, it means like the soul is rendered away from the body and has no chance at an afterlife, and it's a really horrible thing. And then he starts seeing other stuff happening. He gets introduced to sorry, I'm just trying to remember her name real quick.
Sadira? Did I make that part up?
Well, Sadira is from Dark Sun, if you're
I thought it was something like that, though.
It definitely begins with an S.
Yeah.
Sunandi.
Yes.
Who's the female diplomat from another neighboring city-state?
I believe from what I remember, it was described as other city-state.
Well, and as we get into towards the end, this other city-state is like the mother state or the father state or whatever, like the progenitor of Gajara. Like the Gajarans started off as coming from this other one, and that it's bigger and generally more powerful, although you don't pick up on that probably till about halfway through.
Right. And he meets her because there's people so he's been told that he has to collect from her as well. And that she'd been found corrupt. So a big part of their belief is that corruption is something that stains everything. And so if a politician or someone else is deemed corrupt, it is okay to gather them, to have them pay the tithe, and everything.
Well, it's a little weird who and what the gatherers are, because they gather people who are about to die and transition them peacefully into the afterlife, which is why they don't call it assassination, and they talk about that. But it's also their job to root out what they call corruption, which is basically anything that's evil. It's their job to root it out and kill them. Like that's the sentence for any sort of corruption is death. And it seems like they're also like trained warriors, sort of elite Jedi warrior sort of this setting. So it's
jury's execution.
Right. So it's a weird but there's not a lot of them. There's only 3 in the whole city-state.
Yeah.
So
and then over time, it just. So he questions it, though, because in part of what happened in the other dream, or in the other attempt to gather, and then we get caught in this intrigue. We suddenly find out that he's actually the brother of the prince. And I know I'm jumping really fast, but I think this is part of what happened. It was like suddenly you feel out to find the story you originally thought you were getting into is tied to the real story, and is necessary to understand, I think, to some degree. But there's a completely different story going on.
Well, and part of where I struggled with it is not only because you thought you were getting a story, but that wasn't really even the story, but the big reveal of what the story really is supposed to. I feel like it's supposed to feel like a big deal, but it's entirely based off of a history of the setting and the people that we were never introduced to. And so I'm I don't understand. I get it that this is supposed to be a big deal. It doesn't feel like one to me.
Right. And so the big reveal is that the current prince, they don't have, because of the history of the goddess and everything else, it's always a prince that rules, it's not a king, so he's actually the real leader. He One, in order to become the prince, he killed pretty much all of his family except for Ahiru, who had been given to the Hedawa, which
That
is
religious
this
order.
religious order, basically.
And they're you mentioned they follow the goddess of dreams, basically. That is also represented by the moon. There are other gods that are worshipped in other places, but in this city, it's just this goddess of dreams. And dreams are kind of, when you're dreaming, it's also kind of like you're briefly visiting the afterlife. So the world of dreams and the world of the afterlife are kind of the same place. It's just a matter of whether or not you're there permanently.
Right. And not only had he killed all of those folks in order to ascend to power, people started wondering that he had a type of madness and tried to heal him with the dream blood. And really, in fact, that just made him very powerful and made him want more and more of it. But it also turns out one of the reveals is that what most of the people in the Hedawa had been always told was the dream blood was only reserved for healing and stuff like that. Like, that was why they did this heavy thing, was to do good in the world. And it turns out that the Hedawa was selling like half of the dream blood to the rich folks as if it was a drug.
Which is another weird thing. Like, the dream blood is what fuels healing magic, but it's also like a drug. To the point that if they, the gatherers, don't have it on occasion, it drives them crazy and they have to be killed or they turn into horrible monsters.
And somehow, as a result of all of this, the prince now wants to create basically a worldwide war to take over pretty much everything.
Well, yeah, but it kind of starts with this war with the mother city-state, right? But he gathered up all of his allies from the north. So in my head, it's so the setting is vaguely fantasy Egypt. And so when they talk about gathering up all the barbarians or whatever from the north, the uncivilized people from the north, in my head, it's they've gone up and recruited a bunch of Vikings and that kind of stuff to come down and do the fighting for him.
Yeah.
And then he's going to gather he's going to let loose. So he has intentionally sort of kidnapped one of these gatherers before they were supposed to have died. Kidnapped him and let him go crazy and become this horrible monster that they call a Reaper. And the idea is we'll start this massive war, and the Reaper will run rampant all over the battlefield and soak up all of this crazy amount of dream blood because he found an ancient scroll of a former prince who lived a really long time because he figured out the secrets of if you consume enough dream blood all at one time, you can become immortal. And so that's what he's trying to do, is start this war so his Reaper can gather up all the dream blood and then give it to him so he can become immortal.
Right. And so the thing is, there's, even within that overarching story, there's a lot of sub-stories. So it's not just any other gatherer. It was a hero who happens to be the brother's mentor. Mm-hmm. And then a hero has with him Najiri, who they currently have a mentor-mentee type relationship, but Najiri is in love with the hero.
Right, and there's a lot of conversation about love and different people loving each other and what have you, and it's never, well, no, I shouldn't say it's never. Oftentimes, it's not made explicitly clear what type of love they're talking about, but certainly there are implications of certain kinds of love, and it's not held out as a big deal either. I feel like the whole setting and the world is very sort of sex positive and tolerant of all of that. So it's not like it's a big deal that Najiri would love his mentor, and in fact the former mentor / current Reaper talked about how Ahiru loved him as well in the same way back in the day.
Yeah. It's just more, to me, the underlying story is like the fact that they are all so close. It was almost, the prince kind of liked that. Mm-hmm. Like there was that, like just how evil and just gross this guy was. Like, he enjoyed putting them in a position where he was going to get his way either way, but they had to play out this whole scene in terms of like. So the thing is Hero is starting to turn into a Reaper. Najiri could kill him and stop him from becoming a Reaper, but then he'd have to. So part of the story was like this conflict people were having in terms of what do they do. Does Najiri kill Hero before he becomes a Reaper to save him from that fate? Because it's like pretty much considered one of the worst possible fates for a Gatherer. Does Hero eventually give in and kill Najiri because he really needs Dreamblood, like we were talking earlier, in terms of the withdrawals and stuff like that? And just how do we actually handle that type of stuff? There's a lot of those sorts of moral dilemmas, I think, presented through it and kind of jacked up a little bit in terms of, like, there's a moral dilemma to begin with, and then you add in emotions and stuff like that.
Well, and it's interesting as well because the characters are presented as the kind of characters who see the world in a little bit more black and white, right? There's not any shades of gray for the Gatherers and for the Hedawa. They have a task to do. They have to bring peace, and they do that by gathering Dreamblood, and they, to collect the tithes, and they do all these things to maintain the sort of peace. And everything is very black and white. No, we're not assassins. We're not killers. We're providing a service that's allowing people to peacefully move on. That's also helping the rest of the community, and it's something that people are doing willingly, and blah blah blah, whatever. But then, I say almost from the beginning, but really at about a quarter of the way through, when all the different people start running into each other, all of that starts getting thrown into question. Right? Suddenly they're having to struggle with these morally gray areas, and what do we do, and how do we play this out? Eric, you've said a lot to say.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm trying to refresh my memory. It's been a month since I read the book.
And I literally finished it a few hours ago, and I probably have as strong of a recollection as you do, just because there was so much going on, and it was so hard to follow for me. Because I think she wrote it in a way that assumed that you kind of knew the world and what was going on. I feel like she as an author went out of her way to present a different perspective, right? Not only is it very sort of tolerant and sex positive, it's more Afro fantasy, it's Egyptian rooted instead of Western Europe sort of situated, and I think, I don't know, in my head, she took the attitude of, well, if it was Western fantasy, I wouldn't have to explain all these things. People would know them, right? So I'm not going to explain all these things and just assume that people know them because, why should it be different just because we're doing something? Except it is different, and I don't have the background to pick it all up.
Honestly, it's a fair position that she can make, and it's not on her; it's on us, for learning more and all that, to be able to learn more. We should not. Well. So, I find it's fine, and we are learning, and I think it's a book that probably helps out by rereading if you're not familiar, because once you've read it, you can go back to it and okay, I know more about this world, so now you can see more of what's happening.
Maybe. However, if we hadn't been reading this for the book club, I don't think I would have gotten past chapter 2 or 3. So I'm not real inclined to go back and reread it.
So I actually really liked it, and I'm just saying, everyone's gonna have a different. I think I often have the reaction you two are having to a lot of the typical D&D books, and this one felt more, I don't know, I kind of grokked it.
Awesome.
But I like it because it asks a lot of philosophical questions to me. Particularly there's this whole scene where they're traveling back to Tsunandi's home city, and they're in this caravan, and there's this very older woman who probably doesn't have much time left on the earth. And there's kind of like this assumption that some folks are making that she will, of course, be willing to give herself to the goddess because it'll ease her suffering. And she ends up having this conversation with the hero in terms of saying, like, why? I still have life to live. I still have things to experience. Like, why would I give that all up? You,
And well,
you folks from that city that's what's wrong with you
right.
guys.
She had this attitude of like when you go to the afterlife, you bring all you can bring with you is your memories. Why would I want to cut it off and not keep making more memories? Like I want to bring as much as I can with me to the afterlife.
That was the parts. Those are the parts of the books the book I really liked was because it was like this conversation that was happening within it. Sorry, Eric.
Oh, yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, it feels a bit more that she focused on the characters rather than the world. But as we went along, we were learning more about the characters, but then we were learning about the world. So compared to more traditional Western ones, where here's the world, here are the characters. So I think that's a different way of presenting it, which I like character-based stuff. I like finding character and all that, and seeing from their eyes of what the world is, what they're used to it, and
right. No, and I can appreciate that as a way of formulating a story. The way it was set up from the beginning was I kind of expected Najiri as the apprentice who's learning the ways and whatever to be our window into learning about the world, that the conversations with him and his thoughts and explorations would help inform us about the world. And there was no effort to do that. It was just sort of, this is just the world. You're either going to figure it out or you're not. And I needed my hand held a little bit more. I wonder if, because Jemison has another series beyond, I think this one has 2 books, and then she's got another series. And I wonder how much of it this is a function of her. I think this was her debut novel. And it wasn't?
The 100,000 Kingdom was.
Oh, okay. Well, then never mind. I'm wrong. I thought maybe it was a lack of that she just didn't have the experience to hold our hand through it a little bit. But no, I'm wrong.
From what I recall, 100,000 Kingdom is a bit more traditional of here's the world and all that, and this one's a bit more different. She also has a sci-fi series, which was good.
Have you read the other books as well?
The 100,000 Kingdom?
In any of her other books?
I've read the 100,000 Kingdom, and I've read her sci-fi book. I much prefer her sci-fi book over the fantasy one. That also could be possibly because I'm much more into sci-fi than fantasy.
So it looks like she wrote the 100,000 Kingdoms in 2010, and then this was published in 2012. So it looks like this was her second book, but the first time she was doing a series. Does that sound fair?
Well, 100,000 Kingdoms also.
Is it? Did she jump?
The trilogy.
Did she jump between series?
Yep.
Okay. That always throws me off when an author does that. They do one book for a series, and then they go to start another series, and then they come back.
Well, according to, and I know this is great radio, Wikipedia says that 2 of the books in the Inheritance trilogy, which is the 100,000 Kingdoms, came out in 2010, and then the third one was in 2011, and then Killing Moon was 2012.
Yeah. So she finished the first series.
Oh, okay. I'm just looking at the Google listing, and it doesn't have those other books in 2011.
But I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, well then I stand corrected, and I'm certainly interested in. Like, I see her books, I read the premise of a lot of the stories, and I'm intrigued, and I want to like them, but I'm not there on this one because it was fine, and the story was okay, and I don't have any problems with that. Just the way the story was told left me wanting. So,
from what I remember of 100,000 Kingdom, it was a very political thing. So maybe something to go in the future.
Sure.
So. And then I think I know we did talk about Afrocentrist and things like that. One thing maybe also to point out is she is still an American author. So it's just very interesting.
Yeah, and she even she started in the audiobook, she started with a little foreword, a little note from her that was basically her saying, like, look, all of you Egyptologists out there, like, I get it. I may not have hit the right names or used the right conventions to to go along with this Egyptian sort of theming that I'm using. I may have what she used the specific phrase. I may have accidentally named somebody like lover of cheese or something. I don't know, but it's fantasy and it's going to be fine. That's basically what it said.
Well, and what I took from that was that she wanted to take Egyptian, but like as a basis for a jumping off point. But she tried to create a world that wasn't like, this is not just Egypt with the few things filed off. She did try to fundamentally change it so it wasn't based off of real world history.
Egypt was an inspiration, but was not a full-on copy. That
but anytime you start playing with language, you can accidentally make your language say something you didn't intend it to, because you're going more for how it sounds rather than necessarily. So it's so close and could be almost exactly the same words as with some other completely different meaning. And then the other thing maybe to point out is that she has, in the past, has been a psychologist and it looks like a job counselor or career counselor. And it's only relatively recently that, like in the past 10 years, that she started writing, but I'm not sure exactly.
And that psychology background might inform the types of characters and the types of relationships and the kinds of stories that she's telling as well, I think.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of places here, like, where I think she's doing some interesting things, right? I think this story works well. I think a lot of parts of the setting work well. I think there's areas where she wants me to fill in the blanks, and I'm having trouble filling in the blanks. But I didn't dislike the premise of the story. I didn't dislike the premise of the characters. I never really felt the relationship of the characters very strongly. I never really felt the oomph of some of the big climactic moments, because I didn't feel connected to the background and the setting and the history that was being torn apart. It's always a little strange in a first introduction to a setting to shock everybody by blowing up the setting, and it's like, well, but you just told me about the setting. Like, it's not a big deal to me that you blew it up, But like the idea of, like, it starts as a relatively small, hey, there's a monster in town. Or maybe there's not a monster in town. What's going on, right? And then that sort of leads you to an investigation to discover there's this large political issue going on, and we need to go to this other place and figure out what they know about what's going on. And then come back and have the big confrontation between the prince who started the whole thing and the monster, the Reaper, who's running around, that was the beginning of the whole investigation. And it all ties up real nicely in this climactic sort of battle at the end.
Right. And it also reminded me a lot, in some ways, of the Children of Blood and Bone, which is a book we read a while ago. That book also doesn't have clear, here's the good side, here's the bad side. Like, there's definitely bad things and bad people in it, but both sides make points. And that came up with me when Sunandi went back they're all back in her city-state. And because of where that city-state's from, they think that what they do... what the Hedawa do is just awful, and it's like illegal there, and nobody would ever want to be collected, like gathered or anything like that. And then you have the townspeople are pretty much, the city folk are ready to attack her because they do want healing and other closure from Najiri and Ihiru. And she was totally blindsided by that. So the fact that neither city-state has it quite right completely was, I think, an interesting part of it.
And I imagine that the second book deals a little bit with the after effects of that, right? Because when it's all said and done, the prince is defeated, the Reaper is put down, Najiri sort of comes into his own and becomes a full-fledged gatherer, and the other city-state defeats Gujara and sort of takes over, And so I imagine the second book deals a lot with this other city-state who has outlawed the religion that your civilization is built on, has taken over now. How do you square that circle?
Yeah.
Another book that we've read that this one also reminded me was the Throne of the Crescent Moon, which also had those different priestly characters and different ideas and different stories. Mm-hmm. So it's themes that occur, and I'm wondering if it is themes that reoccur because there are stories of that type in that region of our world, or those are common themes.
Although Tracy's earlier comparison to Children of Blood and Bone made me think about that series a little bit as well, and it's worth pointing out, if we're interested in revisiting it, the second book came out last year. I never picked it up, so as someone who really enjoyed Children of Blood and Bone, I wouldn't mind revisiting that as well someday.
Yeah.
So, what other sources of inspiration can we pull out of this book? Like I said, I think that there's a basic storytelling structure that tells an interesting story that has some neat twists and turns that you could be inspired by. I think there's some setting details. There's a lot of, it feels like the setting details around what the Hedawa do, the gathering of dream blood, and then they also mention the the bile, the blood. There's 4 components. I don't remember what they all are. And as incredibly important as all of those things are, I never really got a sense of what it was. Like when they talk a lot about Dream Blood. The series is called the Dream Blood series, right? And I kind of don't know what Dream Blood is. So
it is something that is expected by the gatherers. I mean,
yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because it's not just about dreams. Talking also about the sex positivity aspects you're talking about, is that they have this whole other class of priests that bring pleasure, and through that they can also collect I believe it was dream blood to help with
I believe
healing.
it was actually dream seed.
Dream
yes,
seed, yes,
which has a much more sexual connotation to it. Yeah.
Yes. But that was not as explored in this book, but that was a whole aspect of it. It mainly comes out because I guess the festival early in the book is one in particular when they will do this type of collection.
Right. Yes, and that's just a natural part of life, right?
Right.
There were those. I don't remember what those. There were 4 branches of the religion, the Hedawa. I don't remember what those ones were. That branch was called, but then there were the gatherers, the shepherds. The gatherers gather the dream blood, who our main characters are all about. The shepherds are the healers and maybe the teachers. And then the other one was the sentinels, which kind of feels like it's the fighters, right? it's the clerics, the fighters. I don't know what class the gatherers would be.
Almost psychic, right?
Psionic.
Psionic, yeah.
Yeah, psionic would probably make sense. don't think quite made.
But well, and see, they have this element of like we're gathering this stuff up that is the source of all magic, and we're entering people's minds slash dreams slash souls. But we're also warrior. Like I almost want to feel like they're psychic paladins. If we'd have to create a new class that was sort of a psionic paladin.
Yeah, in D&D terms, there's not really one class that fits, so it might be a
yeah. Maybe they have to have gone through all of the other branches. They have to have been a fighter and a cleric and I don't know. Let's call the other ones bards that bring pleasure, right? And maybe they have to have gone through all of those to become a gatherer. Because it certainly feels like it is. At the beginning of the book, I got the impression that Najiri, who was given the news early on that he was sort of approved to become a gatherer, and then he got to choose an apprentice, and they're like, "Well, we know you've been working with Ahiru, but he's going through some stuff, right? Something went down bad for him. He's refusing Dream Blood. He's refusing to do any more gathering. So one of the other two of us could be your teacher, your master, what have you. We're happy to take that on." And Najiri's response is, no, I definitely want Ahiru. I've had this relationship with him. And so you feel like they've known each other for a little while, but I didn't feel like it was a long time, but but for as long as Najiri's been working through, I assumed in my head maybe a few years or whatever to become a gatherer's apprentice, that they knew each other. Then later on, it turns out they've known each other for decades. And I'm like, oh, this is a completely different relationship than I thought it was, and kind of threw the whole thing on its head for me.
I think it can be a good jumping off point for someone who wants to explore that transition from that lawful character, lawful good to some degree, that, he's faced with this crisis because he believes in, and these were called laws, I believe, part of his faith, and he's faced with this crisis of faith here in terms of is what he was brought up to believe really what was right and what is good. And he kind of goes away a little bit from being the typical lawful, ridiculous character to getting a better understanding of the world.
No, absolutely. No, it is a nice sort of story of. It's interesting. It's almost if we go with the psychic paladin class, right? It's kind of a paladin who's falling. But if we're being honest, I don't know that that's a bad thing. They're moving away from being lawful good, but they weren't just lawful good. They were traditional lawful stupid, right? And so they're recognizing that no, there are shades of gray, and it's okay to live in this world of nuance. So, yeah, no, that's a good point. I think that there's an interesting story there of watching somebody come to reject their own sort of beliefs about the black and white nature of the world.
And also in terms of D&D, I totally want to figure out how to translate that scene when they're in the battle and they're trying to save the grandmotherly character or great-grandmotherly character and trying to figure out how to keep moving her along. That would be kind of an interesting battle scene if the group was in for it.
You have somebody to protect that is feeble and weak, and you have to fight, but you have to protect them and keep them moving till they get to wherever they need to go. And that's always an interesting encounter design of have a combat encounter where the goal is not just overpower your enemies, but you have this other goal that's actually more important.
Yeah. And then when you get to that goal, then combat's over. And so it's you finish it off, and whatever is left doesn't really matter because you finished the story element of the milestone.
And as much as the story involves people going into other people's dreams, souls, what have you, right, and dealing with life and death, and if you don't do it enough, then you turn into a monster, reaper character sort of thing, whatever. It didn't actually feel like a super high magic setting. It was, they had magic and these these stones that they used as sort of a focus to help put people to sleep and then go into their dreams, and they could insert things into their dreams and what have you. So it didn't feel super high magic, but there were moments of it where it felt like they were throwing in high magic concepts, but like describing it in an understated sort of way that fit into the setting that and the story they were telling. That, like, there was one that was somebody had heard that some of the Hedawa could enter a sort of a state of a waking dream and talk to each other without speaking and whatever. And I'm like, oh, they're just describing, like, they're using the setting of all magic comes from the dream to describe I can send a message spell, or I can cast a message spell.
And sometimes that could basically be that of the demon universe, is that to explain all your magical spells, it is through the dream, it is through this, your dragon and all that, in order to do magic and all that. So you can still probably use the same classes that you typically use, but just add the flavor of it, of the dream blood, the dreams, and all that as a source of magic for your narrative placement.
All right. Who's got other thoughts, or should we go ahead and wrap it up? It's been a relatively short discussion, but I also felt like even with all the twists and turns involved, the story was relatively straightforward. Go kill this person. Oh no, they know a secret that is actually important to us. We'll let them live for a while. Oh no, there's a horrible monster. Let's go find out more about that. Oh, it's part of this plot. War. Right? Kill all the bad guys. Right? So there's a lot of complexity in the characters, but in terms of the questions that it's asking, but in terms of the plot, like, there's a handful of story points, and it goes through pretty quickly.
Yeah, and the thing is I don't know if sorry, I don't know how, I'm trying to figure out how to say it. So there's this whole area where the prince, like the princess, their father had multiple wives, the prince has multiple wives, so there's lots of kids, and that seems very different. But the idea that they would, all be in competition with each other and potentially kill each other off felt very Western to me.
Oh.
Like, I know it happened elsewhere too, but like, so, I don't think there was as much complexity there because of that sort of stuff. Like, there were hints of things that were very common to Western that made it feel less unique, I guess, to me, in some ways.
Yeah, no, and well,
and that's why it's hard to talk about.
And I don't know, like, you're right. So, like, the father, who when he was the prince, had they have like their own little mini palace. I got the impression was sort of like outside of the city, where all of the wives and the kids were raised and lived and what have you. And so the father had many wives and many kids, but then as soon as the current prince became prince, he had all of his brothers slaughtered and all of their mothers slaughtered, including his own. And the only one that survived was Aheru, because he had been taken by the Hedawa. So basically he'd gone into the priesthood and was already spoken for and was not going to be a threat to his power because he was a priest.
Well, and was supposed to get killed, but then the mother interceded and basically made the argument that because he was already a priest, do you really want the Hedawa to be upset with you? because in their society, the way it's supposed to work is there was like 3 or 4 different power groups that theoretically all had equal power in the city. And part of what made this all not go well was because the prince was unbalancing that and taking all of the power for himself. But the Hedawa are supposed to be
in equal footing to and there's only 3 of them, so even that, like, they had significant power if they were equal to the prince. So there's only 3 of them. They're almost little princes, you know?
Right. Yeah. And, like, there were other parts that I thought were interesting, too, but I think are kind of hard to talk about in this format but I'll try to talk about it quickly just because I think it was interesting, is that, so you start off the book with basically just hearing the Hedawah stuff. It sounds very fantasy, like not typical fantasy, but it fits into a normal fantasy viewpoint, particularly with a lot of the black and white thinking. Because I know the author tends to like to write about, social justice type issues is probably the easiest way to talk about it. One thing that it did feel a little bit like is looking at American history and how we're often brought up, and then suddenly we realize that the Tulsa riots happened.
Sure.
And those other areas that were often hidden from history, and because there's this whole line in the book about how the goddess came about, and in particular how the Hedawah started and how they started with the dream blood and stuff like that had been completely rewritten afterwards to make it sound all pretty and good, but underneath was not.
Well, and that there were whole other sections, like the history of the one prince who had learned to gather all the dream blood and become immortal. Like, Aheru was shocked. Like, that can't be true. If anybody would have known about that, it would have been the Hedawah and the gatherers, but nobody talks about it over there. And I'm one of the 3 gatherers of the city. If I don't know this history, clearly you're making things up.
Right. So that was also a part of the book that I enjoyed exploring and going through and having that kind of realization walk through.
Okay. Any other last thoughts? Eric, you have any last thoughts?
I do not have any more last thoughts.
All right. Then I guess it's time to go ahead and wrap up this episode of the book club. We had an interesting experience, I think, with this book. And we're kind of a little all over the place. I think we all recognize that it was a different sort of book. And it was a little hard to follow at times, and some of us liked that, and some of us struggled with that, and and that's all okay. I'm certainly not opposed to continuing down this vein and seeing what else comes of it. But I don't think I would have read this book on my own if it wasn't for the book club. So, you all kept me going through it and trying something new. So, I do appreciate that. Certainly, I've made Tracy read things she doesn't like. So, so we're going to go ahead and call that the end of our episode. It is time to say goodbye, but we first want to say thank you to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/The Show, and all of you who shop at Amazon and the DMs Guild using our affiliate links at thetomeshow.com.
And if you'd like to contact us, you can send us an email, thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can call our biz line. It's 919-BIZ-TOME, 919-BIZ-TOME. You can find me on Twitter at SarahDarkMagic with an H, and SarahDarkMagic.com. You can find Jeff at Squatch, SQUACH, and at The Tome Show on Twitter. You can find Eric on Twitter at EricMPAQ, ERICMPAQ, and you can watch our stream of episode recordings on twitch.tv/Tome Show, and watch the video after the fact on The Tome Show's YouTube channel. Show notes and other great shows are at thetomeshow.com.
All right, and so that was this book. That was The Killing Moon, for all that it was. Coming up in December, the plan is mid-December, we're going to be reading The Sword of Summer by Rick Riordan. Tracy wanted something nice and light and not so hard to read through, going through the holidays and all of that. And Rick Riordan books, in my experience, tend to be that. I haven't read this one, so I don't know. So we'll see. Until then, though, keep turning the page, Tomites. The end. This one doesn't end that way.
I can still say it.
Absolutely, anytime you want. I expect that any given day you were just walking the halls, going to the grocery store, whispering, the tome, the tome, to yourself.
Just
Right? Exactly right. Exactly right. So
how's the voting for the uh, adventures
I
going?
have not checked since last night. But when I checked last night, Curse of Strahd was winning several states, which I tweeted about. But in all but one of those categories, it was only winning by literally one point. I should say. I shouldn't say one vote, because the way I'm ranking it is basically if a book gets a vote for the best adventure, I give it 3 points. If somebody says it's the second best adventure, I give it 2 points. If they say it was the third best adventure, I give it 1 point. And so, in every one of those states, Curse of Strahd was winning, but only by 1 point.
Are we going to accept ballots after November 3rd?
We're not going to accept ballots after November 2nd because I need time to calculate stuff before our recording on November 3rd. So, as much as I would love to be able to do all that, because we decided to go with a state-by-state breakdown, there is no way I can do the math and have my table of results and report it on the recording on November 3rd, the night of November 3rd, on the fly, be like, well, Alabama is voting for so, and that's not something I could do. So I gave myself the day to figure it out.
Yeah. So if you're going by state, does outside of Canada, outside of the U.S. Canada?
Yes, no, that is one of the categories. It's basically every U.S. state, and then outside of the U.S. Outside of the U.S. is the one category that voted for Curse of Strahd, where it's not that close. Like it's winning the outside of the Curse of Strahd is winning the outside of the U.S. vote by like 6 or 7 points.
Oh, wow.
So, and then there's the Kobold Press contingent, and a lot of them live out, I think, in Seattle, and so they got all their people to write in Empire of the Ghouls.
What about Teos's adventure?
Which one? The one in Ack Inc?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, so he and I talked a little bit about that on Twitter. I took my list from a website that listed all of the adventures, so that I wouldn't have to draw the line and make the call about what we are and are not going to include. And I looked like from that list, and I think it may have just been the Wikipedia page for D&D Adventures, but it looked like their approach was if the main thing in the product wasn't the adventure, don't include it. So they don't have Ack Inc., they don't have, Theros, they don't have Ravnica, all of which have adventures in them, but they left all of that off the list because that wasn't the main thrust of the product. So, and then that becomes, okay, then why does the Essentials kit or the Starters set count? But that's why I use their list, so I wouldn't have to make that call. Because actually, Lost Lands of Phandelver is getting real strong results as well. It was the early leader in the whole thing. So,
nice.
But yeah, we'll find out how it all goes down on the 3rd, when I can spend all my time going through that database and crunching those numbers and not thinking about anything else that's going on November 3rd. I can deal with those ramifications in the week or so afterwards. I like Fred's comment, though, about how super American it is to think that Rhode Island counts as much as not America. Yeah, no, that's about right. Rhode Island is equal to every other part of the world. So, all right.
Yeah.
Eric's not sure what to say about that.
I also have Tuesday off for other reasons.
Nice.
Because
I do not. I am teaching all day on Tuesday. So that'll be exhausting.
I have stuff at home to do. And
yep. And Tracy, and we're still streaming, by the way, in case you're worried about what we're talking about. But I was talking to Sam a little bit on the Discord. This is the week we should also be doing the Fit episode but we're doing this, and with the election night special, and then we usually do behind the DM screen at the beginning of the month. I thought it might just be easier if we just do one fitness episode basically between now and Christmas as sort of our holiday, how to try to stay healthy discussion, and then just call it good sort of until January, if that works for you.
Sure. Maybe we should do it before American Thanksgiving.
I suppose that would make sense, yes. And all
so nobody feels
right.
bad.
And relevant to both of you, we had talked, Eric and I anyway, had talked a little bit on the Discord about maybe doing a sort of long-term look at some of these D&D fantasy-themed journals.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there's the official D&D one, which is very much about sort of creativity and storytelling. It's not really sort of a personal journal. And
go back into
and then the other one I was looking at was Hero Journal, which is sort of a fantasy themed, but I think it's a more like personal journal. They're not cheap, but I think they take PayPal, which means I could use some Tome Show money and buy those for everybody. And so we would maybe I was thinking we'd start in January, which makes sense for New Year, right? We could start in January and do sort of a first, like, here's our first impressions, and then do sort of like 2 or 3 checkups throughout the year as we go through the journals, and sort of see how we're doing with them over time. I think the Hero Journal one doesn't even cover a year, which is part of why it gets so expensive, because they're like $40 a piece or whatever, and it covers, I don't know, 4 months or whatever. But we can, if that sounds good, I'll look into what it takes to do that. And
there's also a category of journaling games that exists. Like I backed one recently which was a time travel one called Wait for Me.
Okay, well, I'd be interested in looking at those because like there's a lot of cool. Somebody mentioned was it the Raven and something? There's a company that does really nice gaming journals and whatever, but those are more. A lot of those that I've looked at are more like, this is a neat gaming themed journal, but it doesn't like give you the prompts and things. It's just blank pages inside, and it's like, well, that's cool, but that's just journaling. Like, we don't have to tell people what the experience of doing a journal is. But doing specific journals that have prompts to follow is a different sort of ball of wax.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we'll talk more about that as we get closer, and I'll look into what it would take to get that sent out. I might have to get your address, Eric, if you want me to try to look into getting some of those journals and sending them to you. So, okay.
Sure.
Sounds good.
That it can easily be sent.
No, very well.
It should be.
All right. Well, I'm going to end the stream as everybody sort of gets to hear how the sausage is made. So good. So say goodbye to the folks there.
Bye.
Yeah.